Did you sacrifice for Pulsex? Or maybe you're just here and you're learning about Pulsex for the first time. Well, there's going to be three different ways that you can earn or make money with Pulsex: through PLSX, through liquidity, and through the incentive token. And I find that kind of interesting. We're going to dive in deeper to that, but more specifically around the LP, the liquidity providing, and the incentive token. There's also a DAO on here, which I found very interesting. So we're going to dive into all that in this video. But first, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam. For those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. Now, if anybody wants to support the channel, you can check out some links down below. But what's most important is your time, so thank you for being here. Pulsex, fascinating, right? This project, right, it's going to have lower fees, it's going to be deflationary over time, so you would like to think that that could help the price, assuming that demand is static or increasing over time, right? Well, it has those three different ways one could utilize just Pulsex to create income or to make money by holding. First being PLSX, right? So that's going to be the native token of Pulsex. So you could just hold that and the price, could go up over time. There would probably be other options on Pulsechain, I would assume, where you could stake your Pulsex for additional, earnings, but just within Pulsex, that's just holding that, right, could be valuable. Now, when we took a look at this, so this is the some of the details that Richard has shared on Twitter. If you go to the last page, he goes on to say, in order to enhance Pulsex's success, another token will exist to further incentivize liquidity providers beyond the fees they're already making. So I found this interesting, but also, so the intention behind it, but there's ways you can get around that, at least from my, when I'm just looking at this from my point of view, I'm like, okay, well, I don't need to be a liquidity provider and I can still do this. And it reduces that stickiness or like the extra incentive of a liquidity provider over time, but we'll talk about that in a second. They'll be able to deposit their LP tokens, their liquidity tokens, that they get when they become liquidity providers into a yield farm, right? So they're going to be able to take a pair. Well, let's talk about the liquidity real quick. So if you're going to be supplying, say, ETH versus Hex or something, that pair, or Hex versus USDC or Tether or something, right? You're going to put up Hex, plus you're going to put up the other side of that. So you're going to have to put up, say $1,000 of Hex and then $1,000 of USDC for a total of $2,000. To do that, there's some risks of impermanent loss on there. If there's a big run up in Hex's price, you're going to lose the number of Hex that you have. You have the potential to lose some of the value of Hex if there's a big run up in price, right? And that's kind of like how people think it was supposed to be designed, so may not be a good pair, but that's besides the point. By doing that, you earn a fee, right? So when you come and you trade on or swap on Pulsex, there's a 0.29% fee. That fee is broken into three parts. 76% of that fee goes to the liquidity providers. Now, we 3% of the fee goes to Richard, or there's an OA address, right? So whoever has that. And that's a perpetual thing. So that's kind of a cool way to set that up. If I'm on the person who's setting this up, like if I'm setting it up like this way, you can kind of like bet on the future success of your project, right? So that's very interesting, right? If 3% of the 0.29% fee between every single swap goes to that address, that's a perpetual money machine if there's any success with Pulsex. And the indication is that, right, Pulsex is going to be very popular. You would think if you look at the Google Trends data, right? YouTube search volume, Google search volume. If you look at the website traffic data, right, you can see that Pulsex is actually more popular on those metrics than Pulsechain is. I did an entire video about that, the video before this one, so you can check that one out. I've also done a couple other videos on it from different angles if you care to check those out. But the point of that is that if you're providing liquidity, you get that 76% of that fee, right? So you're like, okay, cool. And another portion of that fee you're also getting back as well in if you hold PLSX, right? Because you can be a liquidity provider, as far as I know, you can be a liquidity provider without holding PLSX. So now if you look at it from the standpoint of somebody who holds PLSX and they're providing liquidity, they are going to get a bigger portion of the fees. How? Because 76% of them go to 76% of that fee goes to liquidity providers. 3% goes to the OA address, and then I think it's 21% of the 0.29 fee goes to the. I think we have it right in here actually. Yeah, 21% goes to the. Buy and burn function effectively. So it is a, publicly callable function that allows people to burn the PLSX. So that portion of the fee between, say, HEX and USDC, right? There's that 0.29 fee. Well, as a holder of PLSX, 21% of that goes to just say you get HEX in that transaction between the swap, right? Well, that HEX goes out and buys more or swaps into PLSX. That 21% of that goes through and you can burn that so that the supply of PLSX goes down over time. So if somebody is providing liquidity and they hold PLSX, they're actually getting more money in return than somebody if they just hold PLSX, because where does that go to over time? Think of like a share buyback program in legacy finance, right? Companies will go out and they are going to go to the market and they're going to take a portion of their profit or earnings and they're going to buy back shares in the market, right? So that's going to reduce the supply of those shares if demand is constant or if demand is even decreasing but at a rate that is not as quick as how purchase backs are going. Like if you have two rates and one is decreasing, say the decreasing demand of shares is coming down 1%, but the company's buying back at 2%, then that's going to drive the price up, right, over time. Or if you have increasing demand, right, constant, decreasing at a lower rate than what buybacks are happening, or increasing. All those things are going to drive up price over time. So the person who holds PLSX is going to get the added benefit of decreased supply over time in those three circumstances. So that's kind of interesting. But when you provide liquidity, you also get another benefit here. So this token, we're referencing the liquidity provider, right? So if you have PLSX and you also provide liquidity, maybe you take your PLSX and you provide liquidity with PLSX versus Pulse, right? And that's the pair that you to go through to contribute, right? PLSX and Pulse, you're contributing that to the liquidity pool, right? So your PLSX is not just sitting there. You are also going to get this incentive token. So this incentive token is emitted with decreasing inflation over time. It's probably just going to be more expensive over time, the minting of it. So if it's more expensive over time, there's just going to be less minted over time. You would think, right? And you can take that liquidity token and put it into a, they'll be able to deposit their LP token that that they get when they become liquidity providers into a yield farm. So this is interesting. You have PLSX that you could hold and put into a liquidity pair that you get an incentive token that you can put into a yield farm. And each one of those pieces could potentially be valuable. Now, if you find this other parts of this interesting, but you see one piece of this as interesting or more valuable than others, right? Somebody might think that liquidity providing here is the appropriate like form of like interest for them, right? So if that's the case, they could just do liquidity providing, period. Or now this is interesting too, is not provide liquidity. So holding PLSX and not providing any liquidity and getting rid of the risk of impermanent loss unless you picked like two stable coins to pair, right? Like $1,000 in Tether or something, and $1,000 in USDC, or two things like that, because they're pegged to the dollar. So you have the risk of impermanent loss is much lower because you don't have the volatility on one side of the pair, or two pairs of that were like very highly correlated together. It would be a better way of looking at that, but you can also pick two more volatile things that are more correlated, right? So that's interesting there. Now, I did see a well, I'm going to call it a discrepancy, but just something here. It says a DAO chooses which pairs receive this incentive token and at what rates. So there is a DAO. A DAO is just like a company, effectively, that's decentralized. So a decentralized autonomous organization. Autonomous is just a fancy word for saying that it like just operates by itself or like independently, right? So you have this decentralized organization that is going to pick how much of this incentive token goes out, right? For which pairs and at what rates it goes out. Now, a DAO, how do you control it? How do you like make decisions in a DAO? Well, you have voting, similar to you have voting in equity shares in a stock market. The difference is that if you own shares in Tesla, you own a, percentage claim of the equity of the company. That's the idea, right? Well, that you don't do that here, right? But you own you own the right to make a decision or vote on making a decision. The interesting thing is that the incentives are not aligned. So listen to this. So there's going to be a DAO, right? This is the last line here. And they're not aligning these incentives. And this is literally one of the first things that I wrote down here. You have a DAO that's going to be choosing which trading pairs receive this incentive, the token, and at what rates. Only addresses the PLSX balances get to vote in the DAO. So you remember how I said that you could contribute a pair without actually having a PLSX balance, right? You could just provide liquidity if you cared to, right? And there's going to be people who do that, I'm sure. So you can participate in something that is controlled by somebody else, in the sense that like the people who control the DAO are the people who own PLSX. And there's a difference there, right? Because you generally want people to do what's in their best interest, right? In this case, you have PLSX who control the decision making for the DAO, who affects a different group of people there. So how could that play out potentially in a negative way? Not saying it will, just, we're just conjecturing here, right? Well, if somebody has control over somebody else and they don't have any consequences from that, like indirectly, which there could be effects on, the price of PLSX depending on the severity or like depending on the consequence, there could be that effect. But you could, as the controller of something, somebody could use that to take advantage of the in LPs or to take advantage of the tokens in a way that was advantageous to drive up the price or make it better for PLSX, because the LPs don't necessarily have any say in what happens to them. The decision what happens to them is controlled by a different group of people. Now, there's going to be some overlap, right? Some PLSX holders are going to also be LP providers and hold these tokens. Now, there's another way to look at this too, which I found interesting. There's going to be people who get LP tokens, or the liquidity price, the incentive token. There's going to be people who have incentive tokens that don't want them, right? And they're going to sell them. So one could just acquire LP tokens and PLSX, right? Because then you get to decide what it is, and you have aligned incentives, right? And you can just cut out the liquidity providing piece of it, and then you have the incentive where it's exactly aligned versus where you have PLSX dictating what happens to a different group of people, different group of holders. In the case where you just acquire LP tokens and you have PLSX, then your PLSX makes the decisions for the LP. I don't know, this is going to be very interesting. I'm not sure if other people are pointing out some of these nuances here, but I wanted to just talk about it in more depth and get some feedback from you guys down below in the comments. If you found this interesting, take a second, share it with somebody else, so that we can continue to expand this. Also, if you know anybody who is already in PLSX, share this video with them. If you want to support the channel, you can check out some links down below, or if you want to connect more, you can connect over on Twitter. There's a link down below for Twitter. Or if you enjoy fitness related stuff and like bodybuilding or peptides or SARMs or biohacking type of stuff on the fringe, right, you can check out my other channel. There's a link down below for that. So there's just as much of a fringe in the fitness community as there is a fringe in terms of DeFi or crypto, right? We're on the fringe right now. If you took this last, 5 minutes of video and you shared it with your mom or, 95 people in your life, most of them are going to have no fucking idea what we're talking about here. So there's that type of fringe in the fitness community, and if you enjoy fitness or health or that type of stuff, you can check out that channel, because that's the type of stuff that I find interesting in that community. Appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.